Hi everyone, welcome to VLGA Connect. It is the weekly, hang on, I can't say that. It's the governance update, back again after a break of a week. Steve Cooper, hello, what happened to you last week?
Chris, I just decided to take a week off, and who knew, I couldn't get to Queensland, but that we'd be lucky enough to get away in that little window between lockdowns. So that's what we
Very good. I hope you went somewhere nice and exotic. I'm assuming you didn't go overseas or interstate.
We went to the exotic Bellarine Peninsula, foodie paradise, Chris. Not known for its beaches at this time of the year, but they're pleasant to walk up and down. And I did go overseas. We took the Sorrento ferry for a little jaunt. That was it.
Very good. Well, I'm pleased you managed to do that. As I was saying to you before we came on air, the joke's on the government, new lockdown. I never left the last one.
No, I just thought you've been smashing your TV binging, I presume, Chris, and I've obviously hit the sports pages in the newspaper. And
I noticed that you're reliving the heartbreak from last night with the Cooker brothers. I would have the Kookaburras. I would have preferred to relive the Ashley Maloney Cedric Dubler moment. Wasn't that sensational?
Oh, look, it was just terrific, Chris. And I've got to say, I do get a bit cynical about the Olympics at times, but those are the moments that remind you that in elite sport there are just some terrific things happen.
You can change your background now if you like.
Right now?
Well, it's up to you. But while you do that, I was just reflecting, what did we used to do before the Olympics? Because there's been wall-to-wall Olympics in my house. I have to go back and check my ever-growing Netflix watch list for lockdown number 6. Okay, that's much better, Steve. Welcome back to VLGA Connect. Let's have a look at some governance issues. There's a lot to talk about. And the question is, where does one start? This one caught my eye. I'm sure it caught your eye as well. A story in The Age about an ongoing saga at Yarra City Council, where a councillor is subject to a, what do we call it, a legal process, and has intended or announced an intention to take extended leave. But what caught my eye was that according to the report, the local government inspectorate has made an application to VCAT about having the councillor step aside while this process is ongoing. Is that as you understand it?
That's the way I read the report in The Age, Chris. And I've got to say that you and I collectively may well be flummoxed by this. Good. Because, is that a good word?
It is a good word. We might have to put it up on the screen so that people can see it and spell it and look it
up. Flummoxed, befuddled, bemused, and not to be. The inspector will do what the inspector does, and Michael Stefano is a very considered individual. So I don't think anything that's happening is not well considered. But we would normally expect a matter to proceed to VCAT following the conduct of some sort of conduct panel or internal process within the council. So I guess I'm a little bit confused as to the mechanisms that might have caused the inspectorate to act of his own volition in this matter.
So let's just keep a watching brief on that. We may even reach out to the Inspectorate office and see if we can find out a little bit more before our next edition. And in the meantime, we'll see what transpires. So another item that caught my eye, Steve, relates to a situation that's unfolding up in Cairns, where according to the ABC, who's done one of their investigations, the Mayor of Cairns is apparently and allegedly under investigation for potential corrupt conduct by the Crime and Corruption Commission. This relates to a loan of $150,000, according to the report. You've had a chance to look at this, and what jumped out at you?
What jumped out at me, Chris, was the opportunity to use the word gobsmacking. But as you've described it, yes, so there is purportedly a loan from a lawyer who's involved in the development industry in Cairns. My understanding is the documentation around the loan that was made some 6 or 7 years ago is brief, and even perhaps non-existent, I'm not sure. And there's been no interest, but $150,000 loan apparently. The really important element of that is that that would give rise to a conflict of interest over any matter that the person giving the loan, giving a loan to a councillor or being loaned money by a councillor, that there ought to be a conflict of interest declared if in fact those issues as reported are correct.
Yes, and that last phrase I think is very important. If the story is correct, it's suggesting that the loan was to stave off bankruptcy, which of course would have made this councillor ineligible to hold office. So there's a few elements to this issue. As I understand how it played out, there was a complaint to the Office of the Independent Assessor, who's looked into the matter, has referred the potential corrupt conduct to the Crime and Corruption Commission, but there's also a councillor conduct matter on foot alleging failing to declare conflict of interest, I think on 24 occasions.
I guess the other thing about that one then, Chris, is you could easily file this under "it could never happen here." And often "it could never happen here" really deserves further attention, because if you boil it down what's occurred, someone, again, hypothetically, someone finds themselves in a business situation where they take a particular action, and it might not be of the magnitude of 150,000, it might be a much smaller amount than that. No one rings a bell and says you have created a situation where you are potentially at risk of a major conduct breach. The obligation is on the elected representative or the officer to know that that is so and to record it. And I think it points to me the fact that despite the apparent simplicity in Victoria of the new conflict of interest regime, that particularly around those perceptions of conduct, perceptions of conflict, I should say, far smaller amounts, that a cautionary approach is worthwhile.
Yes, and on a related matter, Steve, I do note that the councillor conduct framework in Queensland, I think, is reasonably new, or at least has been under review in recent time. And the Queensland government has recently announced funding to increase staff to deal with helping councils or councillors obtain more clarity, I'd put it, in that conflict of interest regime. So perhaps they've identified, as I think has occurred here over the years, an opportunity to make the system more, what's the word, user-friendly, easy to understand.
Yeah, and I think from memory, Chris, last year there was a parliamentary inquiry in Victoria into the sort of educative functions of the integrity agencies. And you can see at all levels, the Inspectorate, IBAC, the Ombudsman's Office, OVIC, that a lot of effort is made to ensuring that people have the information to enable them to make the best decisions.
All right, so we're putting the links to these stories up so people can investigate them a little bit further on their at their own leisure if they wish. While we're interstate, and we'll come back to Victoria in a moment, just an interesting little impact, if you like, or side effect of the deferral of the New South Wales elections. Don't know if you saw this, Steve, but it turns out that a lot of the mayors who've been elected to their current terms, those terms are expiring in September in many cases. The election's been deferred to December, so they're going to have to go through this quirky little process of having to appoint a mayor for 2 years. For 2 months, I'm sorry. And it'll be interesting to see how many just get sort of extended for 2 months, or whether they, the politics comes into play ahead of an election. Do you think a 2-month mayoral term would be a prize right on the door of an election campaign?
There'll be a broad range of views, Chris. Some would see it as a prize, some a poison chalice. So,
yeah, and of course, I'm assuming similar caretaker period provisions would be in place as to what we have in Victoria.
The thing that strikes me about that, Chris, is it's really emblematic, I suppose, of the chaotic world that we live in. That, legislation has typically been framed on the basis of we could expect that, the election's going to be held, and so it's framed as if that date of the election is a certainty. But because of, COVID, climate change, advances in technology, the legislation hasn't been able to manage chaos.
Yes, absolutely right.
Hey, Chris, while we're interstate, and I haven't flagged this with you, would you like to say Wingecarribee?
I always love to say Wingecarribee, and thank you for that, because there has been a development at Wingecarribee in the last. Actually, there's been a few developments at Wingecarribee, if I can say that again.
Oh, I only know of one. You better tell me that was your thinking.
Well, so there's been the bushfire management report, an independent report into the way Wingecarribee Shire managed the bushfires in 2019-20, those black summer bushfires, I think they call them. Pretty scathing report that talks about the involvement of councillors where they shouldn't have been, the political point scoring and the personal attacks while a crisis was unfolding, but also the organisational capacity to respond to that crisis was found to be quite lacking. The interim administrator hasn't held back in his assessment of the findings of this report, as you may have seen.
Yeah, I thought it was, and that was where I was going, Chris, that probably a quite similar emergency management regime to the one we have in Victoria, where there is a requirement for the council to make an emergency management plan, that there would be a MIRO, an emergency resource officer appointed to take control where there is an emergency. And really the fact that in an emergency situation, the role of the council is limited. They should have done their work in oversighting that strategic role, which can be quite difficult, except that, of course, the mayor as spokesperson for the council hopefully is usually ready to go and to deliver messaging in the way that that has come through the emergency management system and not go off the reservation.
So, pop quiz for you. How many councils in New South Wales are currently under administration?
Chris, I don't know, but I'm thinking 3.
So 3 is on the low side. There's actually, it's 4 or 5. I think it's 5. It's Balranald, Central Coast, Central Darling Shire. No, I'm sorry, it's 4. And Wingecarribee, of course. But the difference with Wingecarribee is the suspension of the councillors is due to expire in September. The election has been deferred to December. Hence, those councillors are due to return to office. We've just mentioned the report and the comments that the interim administrator has been making, which I think are very carefully chosen words, because the Minister for Local Government is currently considering her legal options to see whether they can avoid those suspended councillors coming back into office in September. Because as it stands, they return to their roles next month. Interesting situation, isn't it?
And when you said the report was scathing, it referred to councillors actively engaging in sort of public communication during the emergency in a way that was contrary to the agreed plan, to councillors continuing their bickering during what are catastrophic fires where there's really no time for that. So I think the minister would be concerned.
Now, let's come back into Victoria. You may not want to say too much about this, but it's worth noting there's a situation that's been unfolding at the city of Stonington, where one councillor has effectively called on the mayor to call on a spill for the role of mayor. And it seems to stem from a lack of confidence that the mayor has been undergoing mentoring and coaching, which I wouldn't have thought was that unreasonable. And I'm pretty sure I know your view on that. But some people have honed in on that as an example of poor use of ratepayers' money.
Yeah, let's not go too far into the fine detail, Chris. The part that really concerned me about this, and I should say, of course, you and I have a blatant, naked self-interest in this topic.
Oh, yes, let's declare the conflict of interest. Yeah.
So anything that we're about to say, people would say, well, Steve and Chris would say that, wouldn't they? But I think it would be a sad thing if, as a general rule, expenditure by mayors and councillors on development relating to their roles was routinely criticised when, in fact, there might be a whole range of other issues in regard to the context in which they're operating that would be equally deserving of review.
I think so. Let's just leave that one sit there. It's still playing out.
Hey, Chris, can I segue though?
Yes, you may.
Just for something else. On Twitter, And I can highly recommend the account of Professor Janine O'Flynn of the Australian and New Zealand School of Government and also Melbourne University. And Prof O'Flynn routinely posts very useful material around the law and public administration. And I think you saw this one during the week as well, that the professor and 14 of her colleagues wrote a very brief paper calling for more routine review and investigation of circumstances where government performs well, where government is a shining light that, and that there are lessons to be learned that might be translatable across other levels of government. And I don't know if you read that piece, Chris.
I haven't read it all, Steve. You did send it to me and I did start to read it. It's still actually open on my desktop. It's called Rising to Ostrom's Challenge, an invitation to walk on the bright side of politics, governance and public service. And the first thing that struck me, Steve, is how in sync this is with the sentiments that Terry Moran was expressing in a recent interview I did with him about, how all levels of government could work more effectively in the interests of public service.
Oh, absolutely, Chris. And if anyone hasn't listened to your interview with Terry, it's worthwhile going back on the VLGA Connect channel and finding that. I was really taken, Chris. I guess I was thinking of it like in terms of sort of child psychology, that if you constantly beat up a child and point to their failings, you'll get a particular response. And maybe sort of an element of positive psychology for government more generally would be in the public interest. So really, I commend that. And it's not a difficult read. There's a lot of pages that are references. There's really only about 4 or 5 pages of actual material in that brief paper.
Excellent. All right. The link will be up in the show notes. Another one. Now, I was contacted by someone pointing out to me they were a bit surprised to read that the new asset management plan requirement in Victoria under the Local Government Act 2020 does not need to be subject to deliberative engagement. I was surprised because I think back at the start when we were talking about what those key strategic documents were that councils were required to put to a deliberative engagement process, I was sure the asset management plan was being mentioned in that suite of documents. Am I wrong? I
was under the same impression as you, Chris, that the integrated strategic planning framework, planning and reporting framework, that the key strategic planning documents should have been subject to deliberative engagement. And like you, it was drawn to my attention that in the, it's just eluded me.
Implementation matters?
In the implementation matters email that gets popped out from Local Government Victoria a couple of weeks ago, the comment was made that for the asset plan, that deliberative engagement wasn't required, but it sort of begs, I guess, a bit of a rethink around what's the distinction between community engagement and deliberative engagement.
And surely it shoots back to the council's community engagement policy, which I expect would describe what deliberative engagement looks like for that particular council and when and where they're going to employ that. I guess you could run an argument that the work that's done around visioning, council planning, your financial plans, your rating and resourcing plan, your, what have I missed, your budget, obviously, having been subjected to those processes, are going to feed into your longer term asset management plan, aren't they? So maybe they're suggesting it could be a bit of a duplication, do you think?
I suspect that that's something like that. And also the capacity of organisations to deal with another round of engagement when they really haven't embedded yet the findings of the round that led to, the development of the community vision and the council plan. And given that the council plan was adopted before the community vision, there's probably another review of the council plan to be done. So I think sort of organisations will find their level in terms of how they, establish a sense of normalcy out of all of this.
Yes, indeed. We might, Steve, reach out to LGV and just perhaps get some clarity on that in case it is a matter of confusion for some. Before we wrap up, a couple of notes. Congratulations to Martin Hawson at Mildura Rural City Council. Martin's a director there and has been chosen to step into the acting CEO role to relieve Phil Shanahan, who I'm sure is looking forward to having a rest. after being in the role on an interim basis for a while. You might recall, Steve, that Mildura ran a recruitment process and didn't identify a satisfactory candidate. So they're going to go back to the drawing board in a few months, I understand.
Yeah, Martin's done some terrific work in Mildura as a director, so good luck to him up there.
We're waiting, of course, for news on who's going to warm the seat at Southern Grampians when Michael Tudball moves on this month. Of course, the announcement for Brimbank and Maribyrnong is all still pending. Those processes are underway. Keep an eye on the CEO appointment watch page on the Local Government News Roundup website to stay up to date. Anything else, Steve, before we wrap up? This has been a bumper edition.
Chris, I'm exhausted. I think we've probably just about milked it this week.
Okay. All right. We'll let you have a rest. Go back to reading the sports pages. I'm sure you're not quite done there. And we'll catch up with you next week.
Good day. Thanks, Chris.
Steve Cooper, Chief of Staff of the VLGA, with us for the governance update from VLGA Connect.